The absolute state of the so-called truth movement. Just when you think it's hit rock bottom, it just keeps plunging further and further into the earth, doesn't it? It's almost like what they tell us happens with, what do they call it, a nuclear meltdown? That's right. The story goes with nuclear power or nuclear meltdowns that if the nuclear material manages to escape its holding vessel, it'll just keep burrowing further and further down into the earth. I'm pretty sure that's the story with a nuclear meltdown, which obviously is a hoax, but as a conceptual tool or as a model, it kind of applies to this so-called truth movement, which is just in meltdown mode. And there's one person in particular who appears to be in his very own meltdown mode, which is kind of sad to see, but at the same time, it's like, well, I can't change it, so I might as well just enjoy the ride. And it turns out that Mr. Morris, a person who calls himself Propaganda at Propaganda, which is a pretty cool name, I think, when you think about it. Propaganda at Propaganda. I like that. That's nice. Mr. Morris has done a couple hundred podcasts now, and for one reason or another, and I could speculate what those reasons are, but there's really no point. For some reason, he's decided to come out and attack a lot of people, and I happen to be one of them, which is no surprise. That just seems to be part of what I have to put up with, doing what I'm doing. It comes with the territory. That's cool. These things happen. But he said one thing recently, which I thought did deserve to be responded to. I thought I better set the record straight on this one. So let's go and listen to what Mr. Morris had to say very recently.
So when they do the 9/11 awards, I don't know, Ab, fakeologist, you might get invited. They'll probably want you to MC, but I don't know. Your reputation might be going down the hill a little bit. You might not get one of these golden Twin Tower awards when they hand them out next year. When John LeBon waxes poetic about the nostalgia, the wonderful life of 2 years ago on the scene.
Well, 2 years ago, the scene was, I think, in some ways, cooler than it is now. 2 years ago, I just don't think there was as much resentment a couple of years ago in certain quarters, and there was still more of this idealism that, oh no, there really is kind of a research community out there. They're just underdeveloped in their thinking skills, but they'll get there, and eventually we'll see more real research being done by these so-called researchers. So, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I was more optimistic about the so-called truth movement. I'm a bit more cynical now, and this video, what we're about to listen to from our friend Mr. Morris, I think will give you some reason or some insight as to why.
He talks like an industry person.
Okay, that's what I wanted to respond to. So Mr. Morris is saying that I talk like an industry person. Let's get one thing very clear. Insofar as there is a skeptic industry, I am not like an industry person. I am the industry person, baby. I have a monopoly on the whole market. As far as real research is concerned, real skepticism, not the Michael Shermer skeptical about people who challenge the official narratives. People like Michael Shermer and these people will still try and have you believe that men went to the moon. So that version of skepticism, very different to what I'm doing. No, the kind of skepticism that I'm doing, which is looking at the official stories of history and of science, reading the scientific papers, reading the so-called history books, documenting what we find, and applying logic to the evidence, arriving at our own conclusions, with no appeals to authority or appeals to consensus, but just looking at things for what they are. Insofar as that skepticism is concerned, if there is an industry, I have a monopoly on the entire industry. There is nobody doing what I'm doing. Literally nobody. There's many people who claim to be doing research or claim to be putting out research-based podcasts, and that's kind of cute. But in terms of real research, no, I've got the whole market to myself, baby. The whole thing. So don't say that I'm like an industry person. If there is a skeptical industry, it's my industry. And I would love to share it with people. I would love it if more people would come along and do what I'm doing. But they won't for some reason. I don't know why. Perhaps because they'd rather sit around and do 220 podcasts complaining about everybody else. Talking about paid shills coming to get us, and we've got to be wary of all the disinfo agents coming to get us, and all this kind of stuff. Maybe that's why no one's doing what I'm doing. But I just wanted to clear this up, Mr. Morris. Insofar as there is a skeptical industry, then I'm not an industry person. I am the industry person. And let me give you an example of what I do that nobody else does. You've heard of the Library of Alexandria. There was this great repository of wisdom that burnt down to the ground hundreds or thousands of years ago, and if only it wasn't burnt down, human progress could be so much further ahead of where it is today. Yeah, you've heard that story? Well, evidently, I'm the first person to actually bother to look at what is the source evidence for this story. And what I discovered, and you can check out my research here in the Burning the Library of Alexandria Part 1, which is available for free. You just need a part membership. In fact, it might even be a free membership. There you go. Even freeloaders, man. Anyone can sign up and read this right now. Part 1 of this series. What you will find in there is the documentation of the research that I did, trying to find out what is the evidence that there was a Library of Alexandria and that it burnt down. And here's what I discovered. I discovered that people are getting their stories from Wikipedia and from Carl Sagan, right? And then you hear other people propagating the same story. But I was like, yeah, but what's the actual history? Like, who are the historians who've explained to us that this happened? And I found out that it all goes back to a guy called Edward Gibbon. And so I went and got a copy of his book from the Internet Archive. That's the beauty, you see, guys. Thanks to the Internet Archive, anyone who wants to do this kind of research can do it. But most people, they're too busy, or who knows why people don't do this. But I'm literally the only person in the whole world who does this, which blows me away. So anyway, I went and got a copy of Gibbon's book, and I was like, well, what's your evidence, Mr. Gibbon? So I read his book, found his sources. Then I went and found copies of the book that he cited. It was from a guy called Haverback, right? What was Haverback's source for his story? A guy called Arosius, except that the dude doesn't even mention a library. And so when you trace through the sources, you see that this is a complete clown story. It never happened. It's make-believe. And I show the documentation that leads me to that conclusion. This, my friend, is real skepticism. And I am the only person in the whole world who does this. I am literally the only person who I've been able to find who does this. And I haven't just done this with the Library of Alexandria. I've done this with characters like Herodotus, or as I pronounce it, Herodotus, the father of history. I went and did the same thing for him. I've done this same thing for several characters or events of history, and every time I discover the same thing. If you actually look at the story, find out the so-called historian who first gave us a story, find his sources, try and find their sources. If you actually follow this process, which does take hours and hours and hours, you find out that it's all make-believe. And why is this? It's because history is a hoax, and anybody who is truly skeptical will come to that conclusion if they do the research. But at this point in time, Mr. Morris, I'm literally the only person who does the research, which is why I control the entire skeptic industry. Now you take a look at my website and you discover that, okay, I'm making a little bit of money now, but if you were to do the maths, I would still make more money just stacking shelves at the local supermarket. Okay, so I'm not really sure you can call the skeptic industry an industry just yet. There's not a lot of money in it just yet. However, things are going better and better with every passing month. So who knows? Maybe in a year or two, I'll be able to call it an industry. Maybe we'll get some more people enter the market and start doing their own websites doing this kind of research. Lord knows I can't do it all by myself, okay? There are so many fake stories of history. I could do this for the next 10 years and still barely scratch the surface. So let's hope that some people come along and they start doing what I'm doing, because there is a market for it. As we're starting to discover, there are people who are interested in this stuff who are happy to pay $5 Australian a week, which is nothing. It's like $4. It's not even $4. It's like $3.80 US a week or something. So there is a market for it. Not a big market, evidently, but there is a market for it. Maybe one day we'll have an industry. But for the time being, I think calling it an industry is being very generous. But in any event, let's get this clear, Mr. Morris. You can do whatever you want on your podcast, and you can spew forth all the hatred and vitriol and paranoia and delusion that you like. That's up to you. But don't go around saying that I am like a figure of industry. I am the industry figure, baby. Insofar as there is skepticism, it's my market, man. It's my market. And you're welcome to join it, but you've got to start doing some real research. because at the moment, all you're putting out is nonsense. So, on the 25th of September 2018, John the Bond signing off. Remember that if you are interested in the history hoax and looking at the evidence that leads me to say that history is a hoax, then just check out the links in the info box below. And until next time, you guys, take care of yourselves.